Well, it's a tremendous state, and it's a tremendous honor. And I get to wake up every morning figuring out how to help people in this state. And this is such an optimistic, confident state, and I want to provide confident, optimistic leadership. And bottom line, and we are doing some great things going on in our state, including really significant increases in our educational opportunity for our kids, in our transportation infrastructure investment, and our respect for veterans and folks in the military, and we're making real strides on that, and I want to help continue that progress in our state. And if I can, let me just go through real quickly what that progress has been the last 4 years and what I want to do to continue to build on it. Start with transportation. Really excited about the christening of the Chimicum, and very exciting that we got $300 million in for operation and 300 plus for capital, so we can maintain this ferry fleet that is so important. And it's great that a new boat's coming to Bremerton, and it's a really nice looking boat, and I'm really excited about making that happen. And this transportation was an accomplishment because it took about 3 years, and I had to overcome substantial resistance in the legislature, but finally I was able to bring the two parties together to have not only the largest transportation package in the history of the state, but really the smartest, in part because it's so devoted to multimodal. Come on in, it's your home. How you doing?
Pretty good, yeah.
This is my son, Jack Inslee.
Nice to meet you. You are?
Jim Campbell.
Jim Campbell, this is Jamal Rod. I don't know if you guys have met.
You know what, not to interrupt, but I didn't realize I didn't introduce these two folks. Suzanne and Drake. We just...
By the way, I didn't say thank you enough for your willingness to do this morning and do it early. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it, your courtesy on this.
We wanted to make sure we did it.
Yeah.
Anyway, you're talking about transportation.
So we're talking about transportation, and it's very important. We're going to do the Belfair bypass. So there's a lot of progress for Kitsap County, which is a place with obviously great potential between our tourism industry, between the Olympic College growth, between the shipyard. And so we're really excited about that transportation. And that was not something that was obvious was going to happen. It did take gubernatorial leadership, and I did provide that, and I'm very happy about the progress we've made. And as a ferry rider, I'm particularly acutely interested in knowledgeable how important that is, and we made a really solid investment in that regard. Now we're not done. Now we've also had improvements in operation of the fleet. We've cut the missed sailings due to crew shortages in half. I brought in new ferry leadership into the system, and because we've got better management there now, we've cut the missed sailings in half. And that's a big deal in people's lives. When a boat goes down, it's a huge deal in our individual lives in Kitsap County. So we're making progress on the fleet and operations. I'm happy about that. On education, we have had really significant growth in the educational opportunities for our kids statewide, including in Kitsap County. And we have made improvements on things I've worked on and led on every single rung of the educational ladder. And I think this is important because one of the things I've stressed is the continuum of education. We don't want to just do one rung of the educational ladder. We want to do every rung of the educational ladder. And it's a ladder. It's a ladder to your dreams, and we want to do every single rung. And we have made progress on every single rung, starting with early childhood education. We've had 7,000 new spots, and 40,000 kids are going to have higher quality early child education. And I'm very excited about that because I've been working on this for over 20 years, since I first went to the legislature from Yakima a couple decades ago. Then I'm the first governor who is able to say every single child is going to have full-day kindergarten in our state. And that's just a world life-changing opportunity for young kids. We're reducing class sizes down to 17 in kindergarten to third grade, beginning in the high poverty schools, which is a smart investment that we're making. A program that I'm very excited about is new mentoring for teachers, because a high quality teacher is obviously the most important thing in the school. And this is something I've championed and led on and succeeded on, so that now new teachers particularly get a mentoring experience. And this kind of comes from my dad. He's an old teacher, biology teacher, and he stressed the importance of me of you really learn to teach once you're teaching, and having a mentoring person to help you is really important. So we've got that funded. We want to expand that now.
Explain it just a little bit more. I don't know a lot about this program.
What it means is we've given funding to local school districts so that you can finance mentor teachers in your school. And different schools do this differently, but like when I was in Spokane, you had a teacher that worked with about a couple dozen teachers, or maybe it was a dozen, full-time. So you had a teacher who was a mentor, and they would spend time in their classroom, sharpening their classroom, particularly their classroom management skills, because what we find is teachers coming in and we like kind of throw them into the shark tank a little bit, and they really have not been prepared adequately with experience learning classroom management. How do you deal with little Johnny who has a problem paying attention? How do you deal with multiple languages? It's just, there's this hands-on learning that our teachers have not had adequately when they start teaching. So this mentoring is very, very hugely popular in schools, and I've seen it in operation. I'm very excited about this because it's something I've championed.
And it's not in every district, but you want to expand it? Is that
we want to expand. It is available in every district, but we want to expand it to the upper levels as well. Right now, we've got enough to do the first year or two, but we want it for teachers who've been there for 10 or 12 years as well. They can use some brush up as well. Particularly for teachers, who haven't had computer skills and science. Science has changed so rapidly. Giving some of that mentorship to senior teachers we think is important. We've also increased the pay in teachers. They've had a long overdue pay increase, a modest one. It needs to continue to grow because we lose 50% of our new teachers. And we're going to have 7,000 teacher shortage in the next decade. We've got to replace these but retiring teachers. And the pay is an important part about it because we're losing 50% of our teachers. They work for 2 or 3 years and they go to work for Amazon. And so that's something we got to continue. In the higher ed part of this, postgraduate, we've done a lot, including increasing slots, particularly for STEM degrees with the high capacity or high demand. We've increased opportunities, and I'm the only governor in the whole country who can say that we've reduced tuition for every single college student in the state of Washington. That's both 4 years in community colleges. So we've made progress at every single rung of the ladder. This has not been inexpensive. We put an additional $5.5 billion in since I've been governor. This is the largest increase in investment in the history of the state of Washington. And I say that because it's a little bit of a closely guarded secret. There has never been a larger increase in investment ever in state history than we've made since I've been governor. And it's great investment, and we've used it very intelligently because we've used it on things that work. We haven't spread it just on butter, like butter across the state. We've targeted it for things that we know work. Early child education, STEM education. I was so excited. I talk a lot about a school where I saw first graders in a Kitsap County school. It was actually at Blakely Harbor, and where they're teaching first graders to make electric circuits using Play-Doh, an electric bulb, and a battery. And I saw these first graders because we had a STEM class, so every kid at that school got an hour of STEM education every day. And I saw these first graders do this. I was so excited. And yesterday I was walking home from the bookstore with my grandson, and he started talking to me. He says, "Hey, Bobo, I got to turn on this light with using Play-Doh and batteries the other day." He was so excited about it. I thought, this is cool. So we want to continue that STEM education. Now going forward, we've got the McCleary decision, which I have insisted on the legislature is making a commitment to do this in 2017. I'm pleased that I got them to make that commitment on a bipartisan basis after some original reluctance by the Republican Party. We now have a task force that is working on a bipartisan basis, and their job is to come up with the price tag so we can come up with the price so we then can figure out the fiscal condition.
What estimate do you believe? We've heard numbers all over the board right now as legislators have come in to talk to us. What do you think is realistic?
I almost hesitate to put out a number or even a parameter number because I don't want to prejudge this. I want this task force to succeed. And sometimes when you give them a number, then they start attacking it. So I'm really trying to work to get this task force to come up with a bipartisan agreement on this number. It's in the billions. And it's not going to be easy to solve, but we are absolutely committed to doing that. And again, I'm pleased that I got them to make that commitment because when it started last summer, the Republicans wrote a letter to the Supreme Court saying, drop dead, we're not going to do it. Well, we finally got them to the table, and they're working now.
What gives you optimism that group is going to come up with something, to take that method?
Well, first off, they are having meaningful discussions. They've had about 5 meetings now. We do have reports coming back to give us the data we need on what the teacher compensation costs really are, which is the bulk of this obligation. So just watching that group in action, they seem to be intent on actually trying to get a good product. But if they don't, then we're going to have to find another way to do that. And basically, at the end of this year, I will present, if I'm chosen again as governor, I will present a balanced budget and a proposal on how to finance that. And I will have to come up with a number that I believe is appropriate, and we'll then go into the legislative session. But it would be better if we can get a bipartisan agreement on the price tag. That would be a good starting point. There will be lots of gnashing of teeth then to figure out how to actually finance that. But this is the most effective way that we can have to make sure this gets done.
Do you intend to do it earlier in the session to kind of try to head off some of this special session late game?
Obviously, I would like to be ask the legislators to focus with great intensity to not put this off till August. And this has been a frustrating thing that the legislature has not been willing to make the necessary compromises until almost a government shutdown. That's been frustrating. I've tried to urge them to be earlier to serious discussions, and I'll continue to do that. Now, they will have a proposal from me in December on how to do this. So they're going to have a clear roadmap on how to do this, at least on my proposal, that will be available to them. And that can be a great starting point, or maybe even an ending point. But the reason I'm confident is that actually the legislature has produced the dollars as required by the decision. The Supreme Court has been frustrated that they don't have a plan going forward, but the legislature actually has produced the money on schedule as required by that decision. It's sort of a closely guarded secret that that's been the case. But this money is now due in the 2017 session. So the legislature is going to need to produce in 2017. And I've been insistent upon that, and I'm glad that I got them both to agree to that this fall.
Do you think you'll have to take, you've talked about capital gains tax as the one that I think you've come out in favor of as a way to come up with some of that revenue to help bridge the gap. Do you think that's necessity?
It depends on the amount and the price tag, and it depends on our economic growth. So we can't answer that question right now. Obviously, we are hopeful that the past experience we've had that has generated this $5.5 billion can do it again, which is a combination of increased revenues that come in because of economic growth, and because we have such a robust economy, we've had increased revenues. We've been able to close some loopholes, not as many as should be closed, just for economic purposes, and that combination has been able to generate, like I said, $5.5 billion. So we don't know the answer to that question. And we'll have to look at that when we get the price tag and we get the economic forecast, which will come in later this year, and then we'll be able to answer that question.
Is the group operating under a common definition of basic education?
Statutorily, yes. So there is a statutory definition, if you will. I don't think there's a huge debate about that nature of it. But what is missing is the data about what dollars are actually being used for educator compensation right now. And that information is coming in. It should be coming in later this next month so that we can actually get a handle on what the price tag is. I know that's surprising to people, but that isn't sort of a known entity. But we get 200, plus districts here, and they all do things differently. And so we actually are in the process of getting that information so we can figure out the real price tag.
This is something we've been asking a lot of people, would negotiating the state salaries across the state instead of locally, would that help make this simpler?
Well, I don't, in some sense it would make it simpler, but I think it would be less sophisticated and less adept and less customized for the districts. Local control has been something that we have largely hewed to in the state of Washington because Starbuck, Washington's school district is substantially different than Seattle's. They have different needs, they have different tastes, they have different local circumstances. That's a 34 district student district. And I said Starbuck, it may actually be the one just north of there. But in any event, I don't believe that, unless you believe teachers are paid too much money, I don't really see a reason to have a statewide collective bargaining. Unless your goal is to somehow drive down teacher education, but I don't believe that's what we need in the state of Washington. If anything, it's the reverse. No other state has statewide bargaining for this reason, because people want to maintain local decision making about hours of their school district, for instance. Collective bargaining, you do bargain some of these issues, and I don't think it's the state's prerogative to tell people what time school is going to start between Ephrata and Everett. That's a local decision, and if you try to go to statewide bargaining, you then decide all of the operational characteristics of every school in the state. I don't think that's what people really want. And again, I come back to this issue that, look, we're gonna have a teacher shortage. We got to find a way to finance this where they have a compensation which can keep them in the profession, and I think that's important.
You've been opposed to the property tax levy swap idea. Is that correct?
Yes, but with this caveat, it depends on what you mean by property tax swap, because there's 100 different property tax.
Is there any that you?
So you have.
Is there a tool there that?
Yes. There are some. What I don't believe is the right solution is to increase property taxes for people, for half the people of the state of Washington, and then not giving them anything in their schools. So one of the proposals that have been made is that we would reduce the property taxes for half the people in the state and increase the property taxes for half the people of the state, and not give any additional funds to the people you're raising taxes on to help with their schools. I don't believe that's politically tenable. I don't believe the legislature is going to pass it, and I don't think it's the best policy either. So that type of property tax, I don't think that makes sense. And the reason is that when I say half the people, I don't mean raise the taxes on the half higher income people and lower it on the lower income people. What has been proposed would do it geographically. So we would increase the taxes on nurses and truck drivers and electricians, and decrease in Seattle and other high property tax areas, some of which are in eastern Washington, by the way. It's surprising, actually. Not all the higher property taxes are in western Washington. Some are in eastern Washington. And then give a tax break to the lawyers in Yakima. I don't think that's should be the goal here. But having said that, there is things you can do to, quote, swap property taxes as part of this solution. For instance, you could take down the property taxes of multiple districts and, quote, swap it by increasing the state property tax, so there's no net property tax increase in any district, okay?
It would be targeted, the state increase targeted towards those districts.
This is really complicated.
Yeah,
so you've asked the question, so you're going to get the answer. Okay. Bear with me. So there are ways. The property tax swap is fine as a part of this solution, unless it results in a net property tax increase for half the people in the state. So that's kind of my answer to this question. So what you could do is you could give a $1 reduction to everybody in the state of Washington in their local levies, okay? And and swap it out for a $1 increase, if you will, for state property. So you're swapping the state for the local, okay? You can do that. But you can only do that up to a certain level of swap, because any more then ends up to increase the net property tax increases in the high property tax areas. If you do the math, that's the way it works out. So in answer to your question, yes, you can do a swap, but I don't think it's going to be, I don't think you can solve the whole problem, because to solve the whole problem, you end up having to increase the state property, the net property tax for about half the people in the state. And I don't believe that's the best solution to this problem. Now, if you like, I can go through a more detailed explanation of how this math works out. It's complicated, but that's the bottom line. Yes, you can do some property tax, but I don't think it's the exclusive solution to this, because you'll have to solve the whole problem. You'll have to end up increasing property taxes for people, and I don't believe for half the people in the state, and I don't believe that's the best solution. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's
If you walk it through and you take you know, Yakima and Seattle, and you could give both parties a reduction of their local levy and swap it out for an increase in state property tax. You could do that, and that would be helpful to satisfy the McCleary decision.
the state would then have more money in.
The state would be putting in more money into the schools. The local levies would be putting in less. But
There's a limit. That's what you're saying about it.
there's a limit of how much you can gain, how much credit you can get against the McCleary decision, over which you would have to increase the property taxes net for half the people in the state.
Yeah.
There's a limit. And I just, again, we're looking at the price tag, okay, but my sense is the price tag will be big enough that that approach will not be able to solve the whole problem. That's my sense at the moment. And I'll send David Schumacher here to go through it in more intimate detail if you like. He has.
Yeah, it's
really
kind of
good
a
graphs on
modified,
this.
modified something in the middle of those
Right.
two ideas.
Right.
Do you, I just have one other question. Do you think there's a good analysis of how local districts spend the money they get from the state?
Well, it's being done, and we're doing a much better analysis, so we'll be having a much better sense of where those dollars are spent now.
Other than the teacher salaries, do you think, you know, because they come up with that pure per pupil funding number,
Mhm.
do you think this legislators get a good sense of that's accurate? When it get, you know, we hear stories about teachers having to buy their own supplies, or you know, all of these sorts of things.
Yeah.
It gets criticized very highly on, are we spending the right amount of money? Are we, you know, ranked too low nationally? That kind of thing. Do you think there needs to be better data coming back to the legislature so they know the money is being used effectively in those districts?
Well, yes, and we're getting better data. That's what I said in this task force. We have this information coming back that's going to be better evaluated, and we'll be able to have, the legislators will have a better database that is being provided now. And those stories are not exclusive to Kitsap County. In every district, you will find teachers who are digging in their pockets for several $100s for paper and pencils for kids. It's just a reality. You know, I know this personally. My brother and sister-in-law are both retired teachers, and they dug into their pockets for literally colored pencils for kids who couldn't afford it. They were teachers in the East Wenatchee School District. This is true all over the state of Washington. Teachers are doing that because they care. These are very highly motivated people who care about their kids, and so this is not just some kind of bizarre anecdote. It's the truth across the state, and we want to increase financing to solve that problem.
Charter schools right now, they were declared unconstitutional, but I'm curious if you see any sort of negotiation over opening up more programs like that. Is there a way to try to do that, and is that worthwhile to spend some time thinking of?
Well, the initiative passed, and it has a number, and that has not been, that kind of quota, if you will, has not been filled yet. So there's been less takers than there are room under the statute, is my understanding. The Supreme Court's going to have to make a decision on this finally, and that'll be forthcoming under this new version of the law. So we'll have to see what the Supreme Court does. I think that would be the first order of business, to see what the Supreme Court does on this issue. I think there are legitimate questions about the constitutionality of even this last measure. That's why I didn't sign it, but I didn't want to close schools either. I'm not in the business of closing schools.
Yeah.
So we'll get the decision of the Supreme Court, and then people have to evaluate that.
Okay. Let's move on to that opiate epidemic. You had an announcement real recently about trying to get people to kind of come together, tribes, police, public health, that sort of thing. What do you envision coming out of that? What was your thought behind it?
Well, the thought first is that this is, if not an epidemic, certainly a scourge, and it's a very equal opportunity killer. Drugs are now. They're killing more Washingtonians in traffic accidents. And it's in every community, and it's in every economic strata. It's in every town, it's in every school district. So this is a statewide problem. And we have called on to up our game in our efforts against this scourge in a variety of ways, including trying to increase education for our young people and increase our screening systems to bring our best practices on how you deal with young people in the healthcare community. We think we can increase knowledge of how to deal with adolescent drug use.
By educating doctors?
Yes, correct. We want to increase access to the telemedicine program. We have kind of a very innovative program where primary care physicians can get access to the best experts by using a telemedicine system. We want to increase access to that for primary care physicians. We want to increase access for Noxalone to make that more available in various systems, both to families and institutions.
Schools?
And potentially schools, you know, assuming that they want to cooperate in that regard. We think that there is a better way to monitor prescription medicine abuse, and this is a fundamental source of this problem because we have so many people who have had opioids through a legal prescription medicine that then morphs into a heroin and fentanyl addiction. And so we think we still can improve our ability to have a database to find where there's abusive prescriptions going on. You may have seen that the state removed the license of a physician who was running a clinic that, and we need to get those problems as early as we can. So we think there's ways that we can increase that. We think that there's a better communication system to particularly young people about the dangers of opioid abuse. So we have a 4 or 5 step strategy on try to attack this scourge because again it's every parent's nightmare.
What about the law enforcement side of it?
We also are asking Bob Ferguson to convene a task force to see if there's things we can do to reduce access to fentanyl and other, there's sort of some new kids on the block, fentanyl being one of them, to see if we can get on the supply side of this. But I do think what we've learned from our efforts to prevent damage from drugs, that the demand, ultimately, reducing demand is the most successful strategy in drug abuse. Yes, there are some things we can do on the supply side, but ultimately reducing the demand is the single most effective way. And what we have found in this scourge of drug abuse, that the gateway of legal prescriptions is something we want to get at, because that's where it starts. You have people, it's terrible stories, people go in for knee surgery and end up addicted to heroin. And that has been an increasing story, a tragedy that we've had that we want to stop. Now, reducing the availability of unused prescription medication as well. A lot of kids get their drugs from grandma's and grandpa's medicine cabinet. We got unused opioids. You got 24, Oxycontins. Mom and dad, grandpa uses 5 or 6, and they're sitting around a prescription drug. Some kid gets them, they end up on the illegal market. So dealing with a safe drug disposal system to see if we can come up with a safer way to get those out of medicine cabinets into a disposal system. I actually passed some legislation on that when I was in Congress.
How has the medical community reacted to that, the proposal on more kind of that tracking regulation system? What do you hear from them?
It's probably, again, we have not had any real pushback. People have understood this is an issue, and good, conscientious doctors, which is 99.8% of them, don't have a problem with this. But you have had some that are a little off the reservation, and there is some additional training that primary care doctors, appropriately want to have. Look, we have some of this telemedicine issue is really a great program because we want primary care doctors in Shelton to be able to call the best in the business, which is folks at the University of Washington, and get help on the spot in real time. I got this patient, he's 56-year-old, he had knee pain, he's coming. What do I do? He's still complaining. How do I wean him off? Is there another drug we can get him onto that is less dangerous? So we want to increase that service.
The UW?
Yes, UW has it. We want to expand it. as far as its basic just capacity.
Okay. They already do some?
They do some of this now, yeah. And it's been pretty effective.
What about on the treatment and drug rehab?
So we want to
What
increase
can the
access
state
to that, and thanks for bringing that up, obviously, by a variety of ways. One, we want to have, well, first off, better access to health care, and I'm very happy about this, because we have 750,000 people now have insurance, didn't have it, 400,000 plus on Medicaid because of health care reform. This has been an enormous step forward in providing health care, including access to addiction treatment programs. So we've had this huge expansion, which we should feel good about, and I do feel good about, because we had one of the best rollouts of this in the nation. It's had one of the most successful, and we've been honored by the federal government. They just gave us $1.5 billion waiver that will now we will be able to use Medicaid dollars in very creative ways. So now, just happened last week, so now we're going to be able to have $1.5 billion that we can use creative ways to integrate health, mental and physical health. This is very important for treatment of addiction. So we can use it in better ways to treat addiction. So we can use this money for wraparound services, because when you're going to treat addiction frequently successfully, you've got to deal it from a vocational standpoint, a mental health standpoint, an addictive behavior standpoint, a housing standpoint, an education of the family standpoint. You really have to have those wraparound services, and this is going to allow us to be creative on how we use those federal dollars. And not everybody's got this. The reason we've won this is the federal government recognizes our leadership in this area of integrating mental and physical health. Previously, they've been in different silos. You got to call a different phone number. You got to go to a different physician. You got to go to a different building. And now we want to integrate those things, and that's going to improve our treatment for people with addictions.
And the money would have been restricted how before without this waiver?
So we would not have been able to use it for associated housing programs. We would not be able to use it to integrate our performance metric. We would not be able to have a common contract for the provision of both of these services at the same center. We would not be able to use it to buy value rather than volume. Previously, we've been restricted that you just go buy a procedure. You buy a, appendectomy, and you buy X, but you don't get value. We want to have contracts, and we're leading the country on this, to have a contract that we want to buy value. We want to buy to see John get well, not just the number of procedures he has. So this is going to allow us to come up with real creative ways to do that. And again, I'm pleased. Look, we've led the country in this, and we're one of the few states that's been able to get one of these waivers. So I'm excited about this.
So this is kind of clinics in Kitsap County would be able to take advantage of this, say?
Yes. Yes, and this is a program under development, so we're still negotiating with the federal government about exactly what those parameters are. Obviously, we want the widest parameters possible, so we're negotiating the specifics of that. But I think it is going to help in our addictive treatment.
And this is kind of becoming near some of these things?
Yes, well, I mean, like in the coming weeks, we will be having discussions with the federal government.
Yes.
But they kind of pushed the go button last week. We're very excited about that.
Sure, I didn't know about that. Do you believe that methadone is an effective treatment? Should we be doing that in communities? Methadone maintenance for drug addicts?
Well, I wouldn't limit it to that. There are other drugs that, and I'm not sure of the exact physiology of this, but there are other drugs that can help people wean themselves off addiction. I would not close the door to those. I'm not in favor of putting in prohibitions about medicines that I don't fully understand, so I would not limit physicians' ability to make decisions.
It becomes contentious sometimes. We've had clinics that have tried to open in our communities, and people really push back, and there's kind of a debate on whether those are helping or whether they're drawing more problems.
So I have not, in my view, not being a trained physician on this, don't believe it's appropriate for me to put limitations on the pharmaceutical help to get people. I don't have any particular fences around it myself. And there are some new non-methadone treatment protocols that I have some familiarity with.
One of the things that's related, and you just brought it up with this, apparently what you're talking about now is integrating some housing into that. Seattle's really in the news a lot lately. They're clearing out some of the homeless camps and some of the things that they're doing. But in smaller towns like this, we deal with it over here.
Sure.
Seeing more visible homeless in the communities. And so what do you think the state should do? Should there be kind of a lead taken at that level that assists local communities in their smaller
So I think the
solutions?
state obviously has a role in this, and this is a big complex problem. Mental health is a part of that, addictive behavior is part of it, but we have a new face of homelessness that is driving an increase in homelessness, not just in Seattle, but in other places in the state. And that's a fundamental increase in rents without a fundamental increase in wages for lower income people. We have the working homeless now. It's a new face of homelessness because rents are going up much faster than lower income wages in the state of Washington. And there is kind of an algorithm that people tell you when rents go up $100 a month, homelessness goes up 18%. It's almost like a known curve. And we have to fundamentally get those things aligned, which is rents and wages. And that requires, because we are such a robust economy here, we've had unemployment reductions in every county, and we've driven it down to single digits in every county. Obviously, there is disparate growth. There is a more rapid growth in the Puget Sound core than there is in other places. But we've driven it down in every county. But that means 50 or 60,000 people are moving here from around the country because we have such a hot economy, and they're driving up rents. And not just in Seattle, rents are going up in Yakima and Spokane, and they're going up faster than wages. So we have to somehow get those curves to match, and that means building more housing stock. We got to find a way to build more low-income housing, and there's a variety of things we can do. I'm pleased that we've been able to put about just under $200 million into housing stock since I've been governor. And we have built substantial new housing stock, but we've got to increase that rate of housing stock. And we have to get people more living wages. And I'm in favor of the minimum wage increase initiative in our state, which is one of the tools that are, I think, necessary to get people to lower income scale to have a living wage. And this is a real thing. I was at the interurban homelessness camp in Seattle a few months ago, and 7 o'clock in the morning, all these people are walking out. I said, "Where are you going?" They go, "We're going to work." These people living in tents who are holding full-time jobs. So we've got to right that imbalance. We've got to focus more on youth homelessness. I'm very pleased that we passed the youth homelessness bill this year, which creates an office for youth homelessness, so we can focus our services, because we have 30,000 kids who are at least technically homeless right now. And Trudy, my wife Trudy, was very active in making sure we got that bill passed.
You see, even with that, because the two-year college has had a major issue, even with us here at OC, where you had students that are getting dollars to go to school, but then they're not getting any help on the other end as far as housing and stuff like that. Is there anything, because I'm dealing with it firsthand, as David knows, is there anything we can do, because there's so much federal laws, what can we do to attach something to maybe say for the students that's going to school, which a lot of them, DHSH is sending, and then as soon as they send them there, they're cutting everything else. What can we do locally, or the state can do to try to put some laws in for students that want to graduate, which we know helps?
Well, there's a number of things we can do. One, we can cut tuition, which I'm really happy we did. And when the Republicans wanted to do it just for the four-year colleges, which was fine, we insisted, Democrats, that we do it for everybody in community colleges as well. So I'm happy to say we won that. We extended that tuition cut to everybody in community and technical colleges as well. Now, there's something I want to do to continue financial aid. Right now we have a thing called the Opportunity Scholarship Fund. It's a public-private partnership, and it's been really successful for students who want to go into STEM careers, but it's only been for the four-year colleges. I want to extend that to the community and technical colleges as well. And I've already talked to businesses, some business leaders, to help to extend that to community colleges. So that's a good help on the tuition side. I'm just a believer in community colleges. I've been ever since I was a legislator over in Yakima. One of the first things I did was try to lift the enrollment cap so we get more students into community colleges. But then we got to increase some of the assistance on the housing side. Again, building more low-income stock, which can help college students with subsidized housing. We got to do that. We got to help veterans. Look, I've made a real priority for veterans in my administration. The first executive order I had was to try to deal with hiring veterans, and we've had some success. We've got 1,400 veterans now have got housing since I've been governor, because we really focused on that. I was at JBLM the other day, and Colonel Hodges used to be a leader at JBLM. Now he's vice president of the United States Chamber of Commerce, and he said we have the best veterans training programs in the United States, and I was very proud of that. You know, I was very proud that we have the best training program for veterans to get them into community colleges, into training programs before they leave the service, because that's the key. We want to get them the training before they leave the service. And we have, the Pentagon is now fashioning their national response pattern on what we've done.
It's this school right here. This is
Yeah,
I know, that's what I'm talking about. And so I'm proud we're doing that, but it's not enough. So we've housed 1,400 veterans since I've been governor. We had 1,400 homeless veterans that we identified, and we got them all housed. But guess what? We have another 1,000 plus that have now become homeless because of this disparity between rent and wages. So we got to attack that as well.
So this summer, the Kitsap Sun sponsored a speaker. A guy named Lloyd Pendleton came up from the state of Utah. And Utah is big, housing first. And they've been very successful.
Strong water.
Yeah. So they've been very successful. And one of the things he talked about. One of the things he talked about was it was a statewide. It was not state programs necessarily, but it was a statewide leadership. They had one person who was traveling, whether it was rallying people or saying this works and uniting everything. I think there's an advisory board at the state level, but should there? That was my question. Should there be kind of a stronger presence on all of these local pilot projects? Our community has something in Mason County. He's trying a little tiny house thing in Olympia's. Is there a way to link those up better?
Yeah, and we're doing that. We're doing that thing by leading a thing called rapid rehousing.
Right.
And this is what has been successful in Utah. It's also been successful here. And we're promoting this at the statewide level. You will continue to see increasing emphasis on this, which is to get people into permanent housing rather than just transitional housing. And we're finding this as being very successful. So our leadership statewide is now getting local communities to follow this. You saw the King County report, the Seattle report came back to basically demonstrated the effectiveness of this strategy. So our strategy statewide is going to be followed, is increasingly going to be followed by the local communities. That's a good thing, because I believe this. When you get people into housing, even before you solve their addiction problem, we have found this to have been successful to lead to more successful results. So the answer is yes. We may not be ahead of Utah, but we're right there with them, leading these efforts.
Because I have to ask this too, because I hated it when I lived in New York, but do you think it's time for rent regulations? Because when you see...
We haven't proposed it on a statewide basis. This is what got me in trouble. Thank you. I prefer to attack this problem on other areas right now.
The climate change issues, those have been really big in your career.
Not in the Republican Party.
Well, no, but for you personally, you're very involved in stuff, and we have an initiative on the ballot this year. Are you in support of 732?
No, and even though I have huge respect for the people who put this on the ballot, these are people who went out, knocked on doors, got the initiatives, put this on the ballot. They share my view that this is a huge threat to the state of Washington. They share my view that we got to take action on this. They share my view that we can be a leader on this and grow our economy associated with clean energy jobs. Unfortunately, that when you drill down, we found that this initiative even though it was intended to be revenue neutral, would take more money out of the state treasury, which goes to pay for our schools, than it would put back in. So I can't be supportive of it. However, and this is something I hope that you will include in your report, we have been very active in reducing carbon pollution in my administration, and I want to report progress on that. 3 things we've done that have been successful. Number 1, our clean energy research is really doing great things. We've established a research center at the University of Washington. They're coming up with some really exciting new technologies. Washington State University is leading in the development of aviation biofuels, so you can power jets based on crops that we grow here. Second, our Clean Energy Development Fund is spinning off companies, and we have leveraged $200 million of private equity to develop companies, and those companies are helping new development. Una Energy has the largest vanadium redox battery in the world. It's now on the grid in Pullman and Mukilteo. I was just over at Demand Management in Spokane. They are going to literally light Manhattan. I mean, not all of Manhattan, but they have a new way to integrate batteries to use renewable energy to be able to reduce the carbon component of our grid, and they now have a contract in Manhattan. I think it's kind of cool, Spokane's lighting Manhattan. I just like the image of that that's going on. And third, and most importantly, we now have on the books our rule that will implement the Clean Air Law at long last in our state to drive down carbon pollution from our largest polluting industries in the state of Washington. That went into effect a couple weeks ago and went on the books. So we now are going to give our kids and our grandkids what they deserve, which is legal protection against carbon pollution. And that is long overdue, because the state legislature passed an initiative years ago, but then has not passed any way to actually implement it. So we now have that rule on the books. So we don't have to wait for a price signal. We have a legitimate enforceable cap on carbon pollution in this state. And I'm pleased that we have that.
Is there anything in I-732 that you think could be kind of plucked out and used as a tool?
Well, these are not inconsistent, so if it passes, we will look at it to make sure that these approaches are consistent, but they're not inconsistent with one another. Our rule is a legally enforceable cap. It doesn't have a price signal.
It
does not have a tax. It does not have a cost.
Yeah.
But it has a rule that requires these polluting entities to reduce their emissions. And that's not inconsistent with what 730 does, but we'll want to make sure that there's no inconsistencies.
It would just apply a cost to that as well.
It would apply a cost to that.
I guess I was saying, if it does not pass, is there anything in there that you think we could pick that up and use it a little bit as a tool or as an incentive?
It's possible at some point in the future to have a price on carbon to help satisfy the McCleary decision, to help do research into clean energy technologies. At one time we proposed that in the legislature, and that's possible. And you could use the revenue generated by that for a variety of purposes, including solving the McCleary decision. So that's possible. I'm not proposing it today, in part because we don't have the price tag, and there are other measures instead that are available to us.
Yeah. When you look out long term, this is along those lines, I'm going to ask about revenue from gas tax. What can we start doing now to make sure we don't kind of fall off as far as when, more efficient cars, people driving fewer miles, things like that? Should we be preparing now so we make sure there are still transportation dollars?
So I think it's more important right now to focus on getting these projects up and done, and that's what I'm focusing on. We had our first dirt turn-in exercise to fix the 405 corridor a couple weeks ago in Renton to connect 405 to 167 to reduce congestion on 405 at that choke point down in Renton. And we're more focused on that to make sure these projects get up and running on a cost-effective way. We saved $4 million on that project already by embracing practical design to reduce the costs of it. I think the number of people that we have moving to the state of Washington, we're probably going to keep those revenues to where they're projected now. I don't, in the immediate future, I don't believe it's a threat in the next several years to the revenue base to support all of these infrastructure projects. which again are the largest ones ever in state history. I think it's important not to have people who are going to come into legislature and repeal it, because there were a lot of folks in the Republican Party who voted against that bill, unfortunately, last time. So I don't think there's an immediate need to deal with that issue. There might be a long-term need with the proliferation of electric cars, but I don't believe it's immediate.
We've been using tolling more in the state, especially like that 405 corridor that you're talking about, putting in some of those lanes where you can pay the extra and read around, or the bridge projects on our side. Do you think that's going to be a future reality for Washington citizens that see more tolling projects?
Not necessarily, and there's nothing in the transportation package that would enhance that. I may note, just for historical purposes and nothing else, that my opponent, who's criticizing the tolling practices now, is one of the great champions of it when the whole tolling regime was put in the state of Washington. He was one of the architects and great advocates for it, who is now critical of it. The interesting thing, the irony of this, is this whole tolling regime was started by Bill Bryant and some of his allies before I was governor, and now he's critical of it. We are now trying to make it work, particularly in the 405 corridor, by increasing the lane capacity there. We're building a new lane on the 405 6 months earlier than we thought we could, because I've tried to accelerate that to reduce some of the congestion associated on the 405 corridor. But we're building, like I said, $16 billion with a B of infrastructure without using additional tolling in the package that we passed. And I'm happy about that, because 200,000 people are going to go to work, and it's across the state of Washington. It's very important in Kitsap County that we had this injection of investment in our ferry system. It's important to do the Belfair cutoff. I think that's a $67 million project that was financed in this package without necessity tolling, additional tolling. And while we're at it, I'll have to tell you that I disagree with my opponent about carbon pollution as well.
In what way?
Well, he has said that we shouldn't do anything about it. Fundamentally, he said he just basically says the state should not have a commitment to doing something about carbon pollution. I just think that's incredible. He's with Donald Trump on this. Donald Trump doesn't think we should do anything about carbon pollution either. I think they're both wrong big time, because our state's being hurt. Kitsap County's being hurt. Our oyster industry is being degraded because of ocean acidification. Carbon is going into the water and making the water more acidic, and some of our oyster operations have been moved to Hawaii because that acidity has made it difficult for oysters to grow when they're young, because they can't deposit calcium carbonate without more energy usage, and that's hurt our oyster industry. And for Bill Bryant to run for governor and say we shouldn't do something about this, I find that disappointing, and I think he and Donald Trump are wrong on this subject. We ought to take common sense measures to deal with climate change and ocean acidification, and the world is now moving on this. The world, you know, California, Oregon, British Columbia, Quebec, 8 Northeast states, Europe, China, the world just signed a treaty on this. To think Washington's going to not do our part is pretty disappointing to me.
This is a question. It's not environmental, but it's outdoors, so I'll draw a connection. But we did some reporting lately on the state parks department and this backlog. There's $500 million of backlog of work on needed upkeep, all sorts of things like that. Discover Pass hasn't provided enough to catch up with that. But there's a lot of property, and we outlined a number of just gorgeous places over on this side of the water that aren't publicly accessible because they can't keep up with what needs to be done. Should the state continue to acquire property? Should the state start to look at surplusing certain things so we could get some money back into the system to kind of open things up for the public to use them? How do you look at that question?
Well, first off, we need a more robust commitment to these jewels in the crown of the state of Washington. And I have been very vigorous and somewhat successful. I was able to get $25 million into the state park budget this year, which is the largest expansion, in a long, long time, because I'm a huge state park supporter, and nobody's ever frowning in a state park. When people are in state parks, they're happy. So we want to keep our state parks.
Unless it's cleaning the garbage.
What's that?
Unless the guys aren't there picking the garbage.
Yeah, well, that's true. So I have been a huge supporter. I think people will tell you that you've never had a better champion at state park. I shouldn't say never, but I've been very happy about the commitment I've made to state parks. We're going to have to put more general money into them. I don't think the Discover Pass is the sole solution to this. The state parks historically have been supported by the general fund, and I think they should be supported by the general fund, because I think we should not privatize the state parks. I think they have a function, which is to allow you to throw your kids in the back of whatever you're driving and take them to the park. And this is a fundamental Washington family value. And I grew up, my mom and dad throw me in the back of a '56 Chevy and going to Tawana State Park and pitching a pup tent, and I thought we were at Club Med. I thought we had gone to the Riviera. And I want to be able to have families do that without having to worry about paying for it. So I'm very committed to general fund support of the state parks, and I'll continue to be an advocate for that position.
You said families shouldn't pay for it. You're talking about dropping the vehicle permit fee.
Well, I'm talking about increasing our general fund commitment to the parks so we can at least keep those fees as low as humanly possible. I have not proposed total elimination of them right now, but I don't want to see those fees increase because we're not having general fund support for the parks. And I don't think that we should fundamentally change the mission statement of the parks. If the mission statements is to become revenue generators, then we'll end up putting in putt-putt golf courses and Disneyland. They're not meant to be Disneyland. They're meant to be natural spaces where people can be in touch with nature and enjoy the natural splendor of the state of Washington. So that's my vision of the state parks. Now you asked a question about acquisition of property. I don't think we should stop acquisition of property, and the reason is once it's gone, it's gone. And I realize there's always a tension between operating costs and picking up the garbage and acquisition of public property. But I do know that once that property is developed, it's gone forever from the public. So I am not going to say we should absolutely stop acquiring lands in the public parks, even though they don't have an adequate operational budget right now.
I have some questions about marijuana. I want to know if you are pleased with how we have implemented it here in Washington State, if we should continue to combine medical marijuana with recreational marijuana. And I have one other question that I cannot remember right now.
Well, I think that when you say pleased, it's always this is a process. It's a first time it's ever been done in world history, and so we're on a learning curve on this, and we'll continue to be on a learning curve, trying to work out the kinks and things that we learn about going forward. I think there are things we want to continue to improve, which is the education of our children about the scientific facts regarding this particular substance, and we need to improve that, I think. I think we need to develop more acute ways to deal with some of the driving issues, because there are some questions about whether this is affecting people more than we would like in their driving behavior, and I think developing a scientific way to assess that is important. I think that needs to improve. I think it's a good thing, when you ask about medical marijuana, I think it's a good thing that we now have some consumer protection available so that people know they're getting quality. These people deserve to have quality products, not unsafe products foisted on them. So I think it's a good thing that we have some quality control now, that people who do use it effectively, and I do believe there are a lot of people that are using marijuana effectively for pain reduction, and people who have chemotherapy and the like. Those people deserve to have high quality products that aren't going to endanger them. And I'm glad that we've been able to do some things to allow them to have high quality. We're going to be alert to any issues of people not being able to get access. I know there have been concerns about that. We want to make sure that does not develop, and I will be alert to that and ask our agencies to be alert to that in the case if people in fact have not been able to get access. So we're going to look at that on how that develops.
All right, last question. We need to get you wrapped
Yeah.
up so you can make your ferry. But just give us a last statement on someone walks up to you on the street and says, Jay, why would I re-elect you to this office? What would you say?
Because I am in touch with the fundamentally confident and optimistic view of our state. We are the most innovative, creative, dynamic, accepting, tolerant state in the country. We are the evergreen state. We need somebody who has those evergreen values, and I espouse those values. And I think I'm the best candidate for the job for those reasons.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you.